I stood in the doorway of the one-bedroom apartment I now called home, and watched the face of the man I had loved since I was 16 years old, go completely still. I had just told him everything. I told him I had lost my job, my savings, and the house I spent 10 years building on my own. I told him there was nothing left, that I had nothing to offer him anymore, not the vacations, not the comfortable life he had gotten used to since we found each other again, after almost 30 years apart. I watched his eyes for any sign of what he was really thinking. I needed to know if the boy who once promised me forever was still in there somewhere, or if the man standing in front of me had only ever loved the version of me that came with a full bank account. What he said in the next 10 seconds would either confirm that I had found real love twice in one lifetime, or it would break my heart, all over again. For a moment, Jake Sullivan said nothing at all. He just stood there, one hand still holding his coffee mug, staring at me, like he was trying to decide whether I was joking. I had planned every word of that conversation for weeks. I had rehearsed it in my car, in the shower, in the quiet hours after midnight when I could not sleep. But nothing could have prepared me for the look that crossed his face in that first silence, because it was not the look I expected. It was not shock. And it was not sympathy, either. It was something else entirely, something I would spend the rest of that year trying to understand. Before I tell you what he said, and before I tell you what I discovered about the man I thought I already knew, I want to take you back to where this story actually begins. This is the story of how I decided to fake my own financial collapse, to find out if the love of my teenage years was ever really about me, or if it had quietly become about the life I could offer him. It is the story of a decision some people will call brave, and others will call cruel, and by the end of this video, you can decide for yourself which one it really was. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button, so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what I found out about Jake Sullivan, about myself, and about the 18 years that stood between our first goodbye and our second chance, is something I never saw coming. Jake and I met in the fall of our sophomore year of high school, in a small town in Ohio where everybody knew everybody, and where a boy walking a girl to class was still considered a big deal. He was the kind of boy teachers liked, and other boys wanted to be friends with. And I was the girl who spent most of her time in the school library, certain that a boy like him would never notice a girl like me. He noticed me anyway. We spent 2 years passing notes between classes, sitting together at football games we barely watched, and making promises the way only teenagers can, promises about forever that neither of us fully understood yet. When graduation came, life pulled us in different directions, the way it does for so many young couples, and we lost touch the old-fashioned way, through silence, distance, and time. The next 25 years of my life were full, but they were not the life I had imagined at 17. I got married in my late 20s to a man named Robert, and for a while, I believed I had built the life I was supposed to have. We had 2 children together, a modest house outside of Columbus, and a marriage that looked steady from the outside. It was not. After 16 years, Robert and I divorced, quietly, and without much drama, both of us simply too tired to keep pretending we were happy. I raised my children mostly on my own after that, built a small career in interior design, and told myself that romance was something I had already used up in my 20s. I did not expect to think about Jake Sullivan again. Not seriously. Not after all those years. It was my sister Diane who found him first, scrolling through photos from our 30th high school reunion on social media, the one I had skipped, because I did not want to see old classmates ask polite questions about my divorce. Diane sent me a photo of Jake standing near the gymnasium doors, and I remember staring at it longer than I meant to. A week later, I sent him a simple message, nothing more than a hello, and a joke about our old chemistry teacher. He responded within an hour. Within a month, we were talking every single day, the kind of conversations that made me feel 18 again, except now we were 2 adults, who had both lived enough life to know exactly what we wanted, and what we did not want to lose a second time. Jake had done well for himself. He had built a successful contracting business over 2 decades, and unlike me, his last several years had been financially comfortable, in a way mine had not. He took me to dinners I would never have chosen for myself, planned a weekend trip to Charleston within our first few months of reconnecting, and started talking about the future in a way that felt both wonderful and, if I am honest, a little unfamiliar. Diane was happy for me. But she was also the one who first said something that stuck with me longer than I wanted it to. She told me to enjoy it, but to pay attention, because people change, and sometimes, the people who change the most are the ones who convince you they never did. I did not want to believe there was anything to worry about. Jake was attentive. He remembered small details about my life. He showed up when he said he would, and he made me laugh the way he did when we were 17. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a question kept surfacing that I could not quite silence. Was this the same boy who once wrote me letters with nothing to offer but his time? Or was this a man who had simply found comfort in a woman who fit easily into the life he had already built? The more comfortable our relationship became, the louder that question grew, until I finally admitted to myself that I needed an answer, not a guess. The idea did not arrive all at once. It came slowly, over several conversations with Diane at her kitchen table, late at night, after my kids had gone to bed. I told her I wanted to know, really know, whether Jake would still choose me if I had nothing left to offer him. Diane was hesitant at first, telling me it was a dangerous thing to test someone's love, that some truths were better left undiscovered. But I had already been married once, to a man who loved the version of me that was convenient, and I was not willing to spend the second half of my life making that same mistake twice. I told her I needed to see who Jake really was, when there was nothing left to gain from staying. Over the following 2 weeks, I quietly began preparing. I told Jake I was taking a short break from social media to focus on myself, which gave me an excuse to step back from the version of my life he was used to seeing. I asked my manager for a short unpaid leave, using a family matter as the reason, and I stopped mentioning my usual routines in our conversations. I rehearsed the story I would tell him, that I had lost my design contract, that my savings had been wiped out by an unexpected expense, and that I did not know how I was going to make rent the following month. It felt strange, lying to a man I loved. More than once, I almost called the whole thing off. But I kept coming back to the same thought, that I would rather know the truth now, than build a future on a foundation I had never actually tested. When I finally told Jake, sitting across from him in my apartment on a Sunday afternoon, his first reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. He reached across the table, took my hand, and told me it did not matter, that we would figure it out together, that this was what real relationships were supposed to survive. For the first few days after that conversation, everything seemed unchanged. He called every evening, asked how I was holding up, and even offered to help cover part of my rent, an offer I gently declined, so I would not have to explain later where that money actually needed to go. I remember feeling relieved, thinking that maybe Diane's warning had been unnecessary after all, and that I had found exactly what I hoped I would find. Then, slowly, things began to shift. The nightly phone calls became shorter, and eventually, less frequent. A weekend trip we had planned together, to visit his daughter out of state, was quietly cancelled, with Jake explaining that work had gotten busy again, though he had never described his business as anything but steady before. Small comments started to creep into our conversations, comments that stayed with me long after we hung up. He asked once, almost casually, what my plan was for getting back on my feet, and something about the way he said it felt less like concern, and more like distance disguised as a question. I told myself I was reading too much into it. But Diane, when I described it to her, did not agree. It was Diane who saw something I had not, scrolling one evening through a dating app on her own phone, out of habit, when she came across a profile that looked unmistakably like Jake. Same photos he had used with me. Same easy smile. Listed as recently active. I stared at that screen for a long time before I said anything to her, feeling something twist inside my chest that had nothing to do with the fake bankruptcy story I had built. I did not confront him right away. Instead, I sat with the possibility that everything Diane had warned me about was already coming true, that I had built an entire experiment around a man who had already quietly started planning his exit, before I had even finished testing him. For nearly a week, I carried that discovery without saying a word to Jake, watching him closely during every phone call, listening for something in his voice that would confirm what I feared. He still called. He still asked about my day. He still said the things a caring partner would say. But I could not shake the image of that profile, active and updated, sitting quietly on his phone, while he told me everything would be fine. I began drafting, in my head, the version of this story where I had been right to be cautious, where the boy from high school had grown into a man who only stayed as long as staying was easy. I told myself I was prepared for that answer, even though some part of me was desperately hoping I was wrong. When I finally showed Jake the screenshot Diane had sent me, I expected anger. Or defensiveness. Or the kind of excuse people give when they have been caught. Instead, he went very quiet, the same way he had gone quiet the day I first told him about losing everything. He asked to see the profile again, studied it for a long moment, and then told me something I had not expected at all. The account was not his. It belonged to his younger cousin, who shared several of the same photos from a family album Jake had posted years earlier, and had, without asking, used one of them for his own profile, as a joke between cousins. Jake offered to call him right there, in front of me. And he did. The distance I had felt from him, it turned out, had nothing to do with another woman at all. Jake admitted, with more difficulty than I expected, that watching me struggle financially had quietly pulled up memories he had never fully told me about, memories of his own father losing the family business when Jake was 14 years old, and the years of instability that followed. He told me that some part of him had gone into a kind of protective silence, not because he wanted to leave, but because he did not know how to be close to financial hardship again, without feeling like that frightened 14-year-old boy, all over again. In the weeks I thought he was pulling away, he had actually picked up extra jobs on the side, quietly saving money he intended to give me, without making me feel like it was charity. I sat across from him after he told me all of this, and I understood that I had built an entire test around the wrong question. I had wanted to know if Jake would stay when things got hard. But the truth was more complicated than staying or leaving. He had stayed, but imperfectly, carrying his own fear the entire time, the same way I had carried mine. When I finally told him the truth, that none of it had been real, that I still had my job and my savings, and that the entire situation had been a test of my own making, his face changed, in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. There was hurt in it. Real hurt. The kind that comes from realizing someone you love did not fully trust you. We did not resolve everything in one conversation. For several weeks afterward, things between us were fragile, both of us more careful with our words than we had been before, both of us aware that trust, once questioned this deeply, does not simply snap back into place. Jake told me he understood why I had done it, given everything my first marriage had taught me. But he also told me it would take time, before he stopped wondering what else I might be testing him on, without telling him. I told him the truth, that I never wanted to test him again, that what I actually wanted was the kind of relationship where testing was not necessary in the first place, where we simply trusted each other enough to ask hard questions, out loud. It has been a little over a year since that Sunday afternoon, when I told Jake I had lost everything. We are still together, though our relationship today looks different from the one we were building before all of this happened. We talk more honestly now, about money, about fear, about the parts of our pasts that shaped how we show up for each other. Jake still brings up, every so often, only half joking, that he now assumes at least one thing I tell him might not be entirely true. And I have come to accept that I earned that reaction. What I did not expect, when I started this experiment, was that the answer I found would not be a simple yes or no. But something far more honest than either. I think about what I learned from all of this more than I expected to. I did not just find out whether Jake loved me. I found out that love, even real love, does not always look calm and certain from the outside. That sometimes, the people who care about us most are also carrying fears we know nothing about, fears that make them go quiet at exactly the moment we need them to speak. I do not know if I would recommend what I did to anyone else, and I am not entirely sure I would do it again, if I had the choice to go back. But I do know that the truth I found, complicated and imperfect as it was, meant more to me than any comfortable lie ever could have. So I will leave you with the same question I have been sitting with since that afternoon in my small apartment. Would you have done what I did? Or do you think some questions are better left unanswered, even if it means never fully knowing the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and I would genuinely love to hear how you would have handled it in my place. If this story stayed with you, wait until you hear what happened when I decided to test my own daughter's new boyfriend, using a method I never told her about until it was already over. Subscribe now, so you do not miss that story, and I will see you in the next video.